Anton. Okay. D'accord. Hello. Okay. Okay. All right.
Testing. Can y'all hear me? Mike? Mike? Testing. Yes, 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 yes. Okay. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you all online and in person. Welcome to the Africa Center. To those who are new to us, to those who are true to us, welcome back. I'm just going to give a quick intro and then hand it over. My name is Adolphine Umukobga. I'm Chief of Staff here at the Africa Center. And for background, this is an organization that's focused on narrative change and transforming the narrative basically around Africa and the people of the diaspora and the role we play around the world. We do this through our public programming, exhibitions, and workshops. And this is one example of a very exciting program. Thank you to Nazareth Yaman for putting it together. She's our Associate Director of Public Programs. Yes, if you want to know more about us, please go to our website, subscribe to our newsletter. I'm going to introduce our moderator, who will then introduce the rest of the amazing panelists here. Hannah Giorgis is going to be moderating this panel. It's called A Radical Exploration of Global Feminism. And Hannah is a staff writer at The Atlantic, where she has reported on subjects such as the history of Black television in the United States, the global significance of Barbados becoming a republic, and the expansive visions of African artists working across multiple disciplines. Her criticism and reporting have appeared in publications including the New York Times Magazine, the LA Times, The Guardian, Travel and Leisure, and Pitchfork, as well as books such as Black Futures, Marvel's Dreams of Wakanda Anthology, and Lasagna, a baked pasta cookbook. Hannah's contribution to Addis Ababa Noir, a collection of short stories set in Ethiopia's capital city, was shortlisted for the 2022 Kane Prize for African Writing. And since 2022, she has been a juror for the Peabody Awards. Thank you again for joining us tonight. I'll let you do the rest of the intros.
Okay. On? Yes? Okay, great. I am so excited to be here with y'all tonight, and so excited to be up here talking with you both. I'm going to do a quick intro, and then our lovely panelists have agreed to read a little bit from their work for us to ground the conversation. So I'll start with Nana. Nana Darkoa Sekyiamah, oh my, sorry, is the author of The Sex Lives of African Women, which Publishers Weekly, yes, which Publishers Weekly described as an astonishing report on the quest for sexual liberation in their starred review. It was also listed by The Economist as the best book of the year. She is also co-founder of Adventures from the Bedrooms of African Women, a website, podcast, and festival that publishes and creates content that tells stories of African women's experiences around sex, sexualities, and pleasure. In 2022, she was cited by the BBC in its list of 100 inspirational and influential women from around the world. And in 2023, New Africa magazine listed her as one of 100 inspirational Africans. And Mona Eltahawy is a feminist author, commentator, and disruptor of patriarchy. She is founder and editor-in-chief of the newsletter Feminist Giant. Her opinion essays have appeared in media across the world. Her first book, Head Scars and Hymens, Why the Middle East Needs a Sexual Revolution, which was published in 2015, targeted patriarchy in the Middle East and North Africa. And her second, The 7 Necessary Sins for Women and Girls, published in 2019, took that disruption worldwide. She is a contributor to the recent anthology, This Arab is Queer, and is editing the anthology, Bloody Hell and Other Stories, Adventures in Menopause from Across the Personal and Political Spectrums. Her new book, due in 2026, is a memoir of menopause called The King Herself, How Hatshepsut Helped Me Unbecome. And then, Nana, I think I'm going to bug you to start first, if you will.
Hi, everybody. How y'all doing? Can I just say you're all looking so gorgeous? So, people tend to ask me, do you have a favorite story? And that's like really hard. But I have to confess that this story I'm about to read to you is one of my favorites. It's Alexa's story. Alexis was the oldest woman I interviewed, 71 years old at the time I interviewed her. And her sex life is so hot. I'm like, that's who I want to be when I grow up. So I'm going to read from Alexa's story. Sometimes I feel very alive when I wake up in the morning. I'll usually touch myself while my partner is snoring loudly next to me. There is something very exciting about doing this. I think self-pleasure is very important. I have a good erotic life. My partner and I like to indulge in what we call debauchery. One night, we were drunk and going full tilt at it. It was amazing. And so we made an agreement that it was okay to have debauchery in our lives. Black people are not often invited to identify themselves as hedonistic or deeply in our bodies. Our sexualities are often pathologized. And so we came to the agreement that nothing we do is related to pathology. Some nights or afternoons, my partner doesn't feel very sexual in the morning. We make ourselves feel good by having drinks and food, and that leads to having sex and making love. I'm very explicit during sex. I engage in what people call dirty talking. It turns me on, and I think it turns her on too. I know this because I get results. We also make use of our hands and have a box of sex toys. We often add new toys to our collection. Usually, we take turns pleasing each other. Just last night, my partner was saying to me that we need to find something new to do sexually. I'm pretty sure she was suggesting that we experiment with tying each other up. We've talked about this before and are both excited by the idea. We're both in our 70s and have had many lovers over time. So we know our bodies in ways that we didn't fully know them in the past. We're willing to engage in sexual acts that interest us. We can talk about and say, yes, I'd like to try this, but not that. For example, my partner made it clear to me that she doesn't want me to ask her to do anything that will have her on her knees for a long time because she has bad knees. And that will cause her discomfort, which will interrupt her pleasure. It takes energy to have the kind of sex we like to have. So if we have sex once a week, that's great. If we have sex every 2 weeks, that's great too. It's not about quantity for us. It's really about the quality of the loving we can share as self-identified women.
On. Hello? Yeah, all right, good evening. As you heard, my name is Mona Eltahawy. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I begin in the way I begin everything with my declaration of faith, fuck the patriarchy. All right, this is from the introduction to the 7 necessary sins for women and girls. It's called Defying, Disobeying, and Disrupting the Patriarchy. I wrote this book with enough rage to fuel a rocket. I knew I had to write it while I was still high on the glory of beating up a man who had sexually assaulted me. Who was this woman I had become, who looks men in the eyes, daring them, holding their gaze with my fury until their fear tells me they understand not to fuck with me? I wanted to figure her out. For years, I had been shedding shame and gaining fury. For years, I had been chipping away at patriarchy, like a piñata hanging tantalizingly just out of reach. It was stubborn, but my tenacity and ferocity became my ladder. Hold on, I'm going to get my my phone to read because I need new glasses because I'm 56. This light is not helpful to a 56-year-old. Seriously, listen, Alex at 71 gives me great hope for my sex life, but my eyes need help. My vagina will be fine, but not my eyes. All right, let's start again from my chapter because it's all about fury and I'm sitting there going, I can't fucking read anything. All right, here we go. I wrote this book with enough rage to fuel a rocket. See, it's better already. I knew I had to write it while I was still high on the glory of beating up a man who had sexually assaulted me. Who was this woman I had become, who looks men in the eye, holding their gaze with my fury until their fear tells me they understood not to fuck with me? I wanted to figure her out. For years, I had been shedding shame and gaining fury. For years, I had been thumping away at patriarchy like a piñata, hanging tantalizingly just out of reach. It was stubborn, but my tenacity and ferocity became my ladder. This book is my instruction manual for smashing that piñata. Once upon a time in 1982, I was a 15-year-old girl sexually assaulted twice at Islam's holiest site in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, as I performed Hajj, the Muslim pilgrimage that is the fifth pillar of Islam. I had never been sexually assaulted before, and I froze and burst into tears. I was ashamed and traumatized, and most crucially, I was silent. It took me years before I could tell anyone what had happened when I was on my first Hajj. I did not know of the writer and poet Audre Lorde's work when I was assaulted, but as my feminism grew, I began to understand what she meant when she said, "Your silence will not protect you." And so I began to speak. The first time I shared my Hajj story, it was with an international group of women in Cairo. An Egyptian Muslim woman took me aside and warned me to stop sharing what had happened in front of foreigners because it would, quote, make Muslims look bad, end quote. I told her it wasn't I, but the men who assaulted me who make Muslims look bad. The next time I spoke publicly about my assault, it was in Arabic on an Egyptian primetime TV show in 2013. The segment producer told me I was the first person who'd ever shared a story like this on Egyptian television. It was such a taboo that he was lucky he still had a job after the backlash that followed. As I continued to quietly share with fellow Muslim women my experience of sexual assault during the Hajj, the stories started to flow, with more and more women saying, "Me too." All those years of silence were for the same reason. We thought it was impossible that anyone else had gone through a violation at such a sacred place. I also had to mature into the understanding that the men who assaulted me had abused the sanctity of a sacred space to ensure the silence of their victim. They knew that no one would believe me. I'm going to go forward a bit because I want to get to our conversation. When I first started writing about this online, it went viral on Twitter, and it was translated by the BBC into many different languages. So you can imagine the backlash from men on Twitter, especially. At first, men demanded, "Why didn't you make more of a fuss?" Soon after, men went into full gaslighting mode, anything to persuade me I had not experienced what I had experienced, or else questioning my character as a way to undermine my story. I could write a whole other book called Things You Will Hear When You Say You've Been Sexually Assaulted. For example, "You are too ugly to be sexually assaulted," as if it's a compliment. "You are being paid to say this. You just want to be famous. You just want attention. You want to destroy Islam. You want to make Muslim men look bad. You are a whore. You imagined it. It was crowded. Why didn't you report it? You waited all this time. Why? What do you expect? Sexual assault happens everywhere. Why aren't you talking about sexual assault in New Zealand? You should have yelled and made a fuss." For 5 days, women from around the world had shared with me their most harrowing experiences of sexual harassment and assault at pilgrimage or other sacred spaces. Reading their stories undid something that had broken in me as that young pilgrim in 1982 that I thought I had stitched together. I had not fully grasped the magnitude of being sexually assaulted at the site towards which Muslims pray 5 times a day. The experiences of telling stories, and especially men's refusal to believe them, was as if I was standing in pouring rain. I could feel it drenching every part of me, only to hear the weather forecast on television confidently explaining that it was sunny and dry with not a drop of rain expected. After days of this, for one night, I wanted some respite from that reckoning. So 5 days after I launched #MosqueMeToo, inspired by Black feminist Tarana Burke, who launched Me Too, or who was first to say Me Too in 2016, my beloved and I went to a club in Montreal, Canada, to dance it off, to revel in the sensual delight of moving my body to music, in the hope that all those beats per minute would be a balm for my traumatized heart. And there, in the middle of a crowded and sweaty dance floor, at the age of 50, I felt a hand on my ass. I had exactly two thoughts. You've got to be fucking kidding me, number one. And secondly, this is still happening. I remembered my 15-year-old self at Hash, covered from head to toe with just my face and hands showing. And now, on that dance floor in Montreal, I was wearing a tank top and jeans. It did not matter. Hijab or tank top, a man's hand still found me, and I was done. Unlike in 1982, when I could not turn around to find my assaulter, I immediately spotted my creep who had started to walk away. As if on autopilot, I followed him and tugged so hard at the back of his shirt that he stumbled. When he fell, I sat on top of him and I punched and punched and punched his face. Once was not enough, and each time I punched him, I yelled, "Don't you ever touch a woman like that again." While I was punching the man who had assaulted me, I could see from my peripheral vision my beloved talking to two men who had been dancing when I started beating the man and who were now preparing to pull me off my assaulter. My beloved later told me that the two men had wanted to stop me from punching the man who had groped me. And my beloved said to them, no, he assaulted her. And told them she's got this. It had been a long time. It had been a long time since I had experienced as much clarity as I did in those moments. I knew exactly what I was doing, defending myself, and exactly why I was doing it. And then my beloved and I went to the bar to get some water. A man who had appeared to be from club management approached us and asked me to tell him what had happened. After I explained that I had beaten the man who had sexually assaulted me, he looked at my beloved and asked me, "Why didn't you let your husband take care of it?" I said to him, first of all, he's not my husband. Second of all, this is my body. I take care of it. At what age does my body belong just to me? Patriarchy is so universal and normalized that it's like asking a fish what is water. It enables and protects men who sexually assault women, and it demands that only other men protect us. As long as we obey and behave in ways it approves, it will protect us. And if we disobey, you can be sure that that protection will be revoked quicker than you can say patriarchy. But I don't want to be protected. I just want patriarchy to stop protecting and enabling men. I don't want to be protected. I want to be free.
Thank you both. Mona, I've been struck for so long by the clarity of your conviction and the clarity with which you speak, just in so many different formats, whether that's Twitter, whether it's in your books. And one of the things that I was thinking about in preparing for this is, I read you say or write that you became a feminist before you knew the word for it, right? Could you tell us a little bit about the process of finding that language, of the process of coming to not just personal consciousness, but a political one?
Thank you, Hannah. So I became a feminist, as you say. I wrote about that in Headscarves and Hymens when my family moved to Saudi Arabia. I was 15 years old. I was born in Egypt, but we moved to London when I was 7. And then we moved to Saudi Arabia when I was 15. And it was such a cultural shock for me to move to Saudi Arabia as a teenage girl. I'm from Egypt, and it's a very different culture in Egypt to Saudi Arabia. People often think, oh, you're just Muslim, you're Arab, what difference does it make? It's a very different cultural setting. And it was such a shock to my system, especially because it was a month after we arrived that I was sexually assaulted twice during Hajj. And at that age, I mean, I realized that something was wrong, but I didn't have the word for it. But I realized that, it was like, fuck this world. What is this world, And it took and when I was 19 years old at university in Saudi Arabia, and I discovered a bookshelf full of journals and books written by feminists from around the world, especially women of color, like Egyptian feminist Nawal Saadawi, Moroccan feminist Fatima Bernisi, and other women who look and sound like me. And they gave me the word feminism, and it speaks to the power of books, It speaks to the power of a book and a journal article and all these words of women who are our kin, to give us the words that then become the weapons that we then utilize against patriarchy.
It's beautiful. I mean, the collectivism is something that, Nana, I was actually hoping to ask you a little bit about, because your work is such a collective chronicle. And to do that for a second, I kind of want to jump back in time a little bit with you too, and ask you to share a little bit about the blog that you started, how that came to be, and how that came to influence what is now the book.
So it was January 2009. I went on a holiday with a group of African women from different parts of the continent. We went to the western region in Ghana, an area called Busia, which just has the loveliest beaches. And we would just sit around and swim and drink and chat. And time again, the conversation would turn to the topic of sex. This holiday was also to mark my 30th birthday, just to tell you how old I was then. But at the same time, it felt to me like the first time where I was with African women and talking about sex in a very open way, in a way where people were being non-judgmental. We're talking about the experiences, their fantasies, their desires. And I just had this moment where I was like, wow, why has it taken me so long to have this level of conversation with African women? Because I really grew up thinking sex was terrible, and I went to a Catholic boarding school, and, girls who had sex were bad. And I would also look at the girls who I thought had sex, because people were gossiping about them, like, oh my God, how could they be doing this? And it wasn't until people started gossiping about me that I realized, oh, no matter what you do, people will gossip about you. So this conversation, just when I turned 30, was just so revelatory to me. And so when I came back to the capital, I called my best friend at the time, Malaika. And I was like, oh my goodness, I've just had this experience. And now I want to start this blog about sex. She was like, this was 2009. What's a blog? And then she was telling me about how she had been interviewing her grandmother about her experiences of sex with her grandfather. And she wanted to write a book called Adventures from the Bedrooms of African Women. And I was like, oh, let's do a blog, and later on, we turn it into a book. And that's how Adventure started. So when I started, I was one of those bloggers who, I'd be in my bed at night, just tapping away. Anytime I had sex with somebody, straight away on the blog, I'm writing about it.
While they were there still?
As soon as I kicked them out, And it was just it was a way for me to reflect and I think I was trying to figure out my sexuality, right? I was also recently divorced. I got married to the first man I had consensual penetrative sex with. I just got divorced. So it was like freedom. I was really in my whole phase and just enjoying it. And then people started commenting on the blog, people started asking me questions, people were sending me messages, telling me their own stories, and I'd be like, okay, do you want to write for the blog? And usually people would say, oh no, I've never written. And I'm like, just write, send it to me. And everybody's story was really interesting, really good. And the blog just over time just became this really vibrant space where, we would share our experiences, and people were so supportive. If anybody came and attempted to troll, people would be like, if you don't want to be here, just leave. And then subsequently, years afterwards, I was like, I don't think people realize the really fun, freaky things that go on in the bedrooms of African women, and I'm going to write a book about this. And that's how the sex lives of African women came into being.
How is adapting the blog into different formats, right? So the book and podcast festival work, how has that changed your relationship to it?
It's a great question. So I think of the blog and the book as very, very different, right? Because with the blog, my own stories, other people's stories, very, very short, right? 500 words, 700 words, you're intrigued, you want to get to know more. The book was my opportunity to really get to know more. to really understand how people's culture, the way people were raised, where they lived, you know, had changed the experience of sex and sexuality. What's been really fun with the podcast is actually having conversation with people. I love podcasts, I love audio, you know, so that's also been really interesting. We also have a festival that we do once a year, which is an in-person event where, you know, we talk about sex and sexualities for 2 days. And that was because I'm a feminist activist. All my feminist activists in the house, raise your hands. We go to lots of conferences, right? I mean, we don't really talk about the pleasure of sex. We talk about all the horrible things that happen to us. And I was just like, I want a festival where we talk about sex and we talk about it from a pleasurable lens. So all of these things are connected in the sense that I just want to create space and contribute to creating space where, as a woman, you know, we can talk about sex and sexuality and figure out how to have more pleasurable lives.
I was gonna ask you both what role pleasure plays in your work and in your lives. So I feel like you got right there.
Pleasure, yeah, very important. But you know, it took me a while to get there as well, because I've written extensively in both Headscarves and Hymens and in the chapter on lust in the 7 Necessary Sins for Women and Girls about how long it took me to basically say I own my body, to believe, you know, wholeheartedly that I deserve pleasure, that pleasure was my right, and to fight back against the ways that I was socialized, the ways that I was raised. I mean, this socialization is not exclusive to our continent. It's not exclusive to a particular religion or a community. It's really patriarchal and it's global. And it takes a while to liberate yourself from that. And, you know, as you said in the introduction, I also contributed an essay to an anthology called This Arab is Queer, because that was like my last, like, liberation, revelation, you know, call it whatever you want. So it took a really long time. And because it took me such a long time to own my pleasure, to own my body, to own my sexuality, to own the various identities that I walk through the world with, I guard them all so jealously now. You know, I guard them so fiercely now. I refuse to be limited in the freedoms that are required to maintain all of those identities, you know? And so I wrote somewhere, I can't remember where I wrote, but I said something like, I hate the word virgin, but it's the word that we still use. And I wrote somewhere, I think it was when I was still contributing opinion pieces to the New York Times, fuck the New York Times, because of the genocide in Gaza and the way that they are, you know, propagandizing and supporting fascist fuckery by Israel in Gaza. So fuck the New York Times. But when I was still writing opinion pieces for them as a contributing opinion writer, I wrote something about Muslim women and sex, in which I said, you know, I've gone from a 28-year-old quote unquote virgin to a 52-year-old queer polyamorous woman who has gone through so many revolutions to get to where she is now. And fuck anyone who tries to take that away from me.
Absolutely. One of the things I was thinking about as you were reading from your work, Mona, was this impulse to tell women and girls that when they speak about their experiences, and again, you know, women and girls of color especially, that we're making our men look bad, right? And there's something about that. There's an implicit external gaze there, right? There's a in front of mixed company or in front of people who shouldn't think of us that way, right? And I guess this is for both of you really, but what impact does that have when we tell young girls, when we tell women, when we tell people to be mindful of not making our men look bad again?
Yeah, it's so pernicious, you know? I mean, like, having lived in this country since 2000, we talk about code switching and how the Black community in this country, you know, constantly code switches. It's exactly because of that. Because when I talk about the ways that our language is policed so that our men don't look bad, I know that a Black American woman knows what I'm talking about. I know that a Latinx woman knows what I'm talking about. I know. And it's what I call being stuck between a rock and a hard place. So when I speak now as a woman born in Egypt to a Muslim family, this is my rock and a hard place. On one side, the rock is the racist Islamophobes in this country, for example, who are, you know, the fascist fucks that vote for Trump, you know, and his ilk. And their Islamophobia and racism that tries to save me, quote unquote, from Muslim men or Arab men, and that tries to make it seem like they're the only men who I need to be saved from. And they're the only men who are misogynist, forgetting their own misogyny, forgetting that Donald Trump sexually assaulted how many women, forgetting the destruction of Roe v. Wade that the Christian nationalists in this country have done, you know? So this is the rock. And the hard place is the men of my community and my community generally that constantly tells me to shut up because I'm making us look bad, and defending our men against anything we say, regardless of what our men have done. And both of these, the rock and the hard place, are speaking to each other over our bodies. And we have no agency here. We have nothing to say here. So they're fighting to whatever, liberate me from whatever, a headscarf, whatever. And they're fighting to police my hymen and my headscarf, whatever. And my message to both is fuck you and fuck you. Because the rock and the hard place are not interested in me. They're interested in talking to each other. And it's just a patriarchal fight that ends up. So this is why I think it's so important for Black Black women and girls and of color to understand that rock and a hard place and how it doesn't care about us, and it's ultimately about the patriarchs on both sides.
I mean, I also think that the people who care about you are the people who are going to speak truth to you, right? Like, if we love men, we have to tell men and the people we love when they're not doing it right, because we want them to be better. You know, the solution is not to be quiet. The solution is not to say anything, but the solution is to just reflect back to people. I mean, I am feeling a little bit encouraged because I feel like, and it may be just like a small group of maybe young men that I know, but I've seen them go on a journey, right? Where now they have more of an awareness, they're starting to explore feminist texts. And I think it's down to the critique of feminists. They have had to take it on. Some of the lessons may have been hard to hear, but some men and young boys are taking it on and I think becoming better people as a result, you know? And so, yeah, we do have to speak, and we can't be silent and literally be dying in our silence because we do not want to make our people in our community look bad. You know, I think speaking our truths is really important as part of the healing journey.
Absolutely. What role, I guess, for both of you has the internet played in helping that happen, in tamping down on that, or you know, in exposing your work or your thoughts to new audiences, or potentially making it more difficult to contend with those audiences when they find you?
I mean, for me, the internet has been critical, right? Obviously, the blog is online. I feel like the internet allowed me to find community in many, many ways. In the good old days. In the good old days of the internet, you know, I definitely found community on Twitter. That's how I befriended and connected with a lot of African feminists. I remember that there was a period so many of us were tagging each other in our tweets, that our tweets were becoming too long. And that's when we came up with the hashtag AfriFem. And now I see people use AfriFem everywhere. And I'm like, oh my God, I know exactly that process and the conversation we had that led to that hashtag, right? But then it was a way for me to identify with feminists from different parts of the continent, you know, and the internet was just everything, especially in those days, and blogs. You felt like there was a safety in finding community. And for me, also deliberately, in a sense, moving some of these conversations offline was a deliberate political choice, you know, because sometimes if you're just speaking to people who are in a digital space, somehow the sense is, well, this is not a conversation we can have openly. And I think it's really, really important for us to be able to speak about sex and sexualities and pleasure on stages like this openly, not just on blogs, not just on, you know, small digital spaces, but actually openly. Yeah.
Absolutely. The good old days before fascist, there's so many fascist fucks. Every second sentence is fascist fuck, but they really are. Before fascist fuck, Elon Musk deliberately started destroying Twitter, and for a reason, you know. Twitter was an incredible place for us to speak back and to speak out and to meet each other. And, you know, as an Egyptian, I recognize the incredible power of blogs at first, and then Facebook, and then Twitter in the evolution of the Egyptian revolution. And then for me personally, you know, I've said so many times, Twitter saved my life twice. Once in 2011, when Egyptian police beat me and broke my arms and sexually assaulted me, and I was detained for 12 hours incommunicado. My family thought I was dead, and I disappeared. And hashtag Free Mona. So before the hashtag Free Mona, I was in police custody at the Interior Ministry in Cairo, just, you know, a few meters away from Tahrir Square. This was in November of 2011. So this was the year of the revolution, not during the revolution. And they held me for 6 hours, but during those 6 hours, an activist came in and I asked him if I could use his phone. And they weren't paying too much attention to me at the time. And I managed to tweet, "Beaten, arrested, Interior Ministry." And then his phone died. And I don't know what would have happened if his phone was not working when I did this. And within 15 minutes, that's 15 minutes, hashtag Mona was trending around the world. Al Jazeera and The Guardian wrote about what happened to me based on that tweet. And the State Department tweeted back, "We see what has happened and we're going to look for you." Now, I know it's because I had a large following on Twitter and for who I am and all that business, but there are so many activists who have used or were using Twitter to fight back against detention, to fight back against violence. And that was when Twitter was ours, you know, before regimes and dictators understood that they had to use it against us. And then the second time was a year later when I spray painted over a pro-Israel Islamophobic racist ad in the New York subway, and I was arrested and kept in jail in New York City overnight. And the next morning, this attorney shows up wearing a keffiyeh. Now everyone knows what a keffiyeh is. And he says to me before my arraignment, "I don't know who you are, but last night, 200 people from the Occupy movement wrote to me and said, 'Go and help Mona.'" And this attorney called Stanley Cohen, a committed anti-Zionist, represented me for 2 years pro bono because of Twitter. And this is why fascist fucks have destroyed Twitter.
And can I just say something to exemplify this? A few days ago, X wrote to me and said my account has been permanently suspended. And I was like, what? What did I do? I don't even tweet nowadays. Like literally. Yeah, and yeah. So
Fascist fuckery everywhere.
absolutely.
I'm gonna switch gears for a moment from the fascists, just to ask you about craft for a minute. Your books are structured so differently, and I'm so curious about your approach to the process, the literal process of sort of compiling, writing, assembling, outlining, editing. How did you go about doing that for your works, and how do you think about that differently when you're working on different projects?
Okay, I'll tell you about the 7 necessary sins for women and girls, because I was actually looking through old archival material. So I had wanted to write a memoir. I thought, you know what? I've lived. People need to read about me. So I wrote what I thought was a magnificent proposal. And part of the proposal was about how Nina Simone, who I adore and idolize, inspired all of these emotions in me, like anger, rage, lust, desire, frustration, you know, all this stuff. And so I wrote what I thought was an incredible proposal, gave it to my agent at the time and asked her to shop it around. And this editor at a publishing house that I really liked asked to see me, and I was like, fuck yes, I'm there. And we had an incredible meeting, and the editor, who uses they, them pronouns, asked me to write a sample chapter for them. So I did, and I was like, I was already thinking, you know, bestseller, here I come. And they turned it down, and I was heartbroken. I mean, I remember at the time when my agent told me this, I hung up with her, I cried, I got drunk, and I was like, fuck this shit. And I wrote her and I said, pull this proposal. I can't do this. Because I'd seen other editors, but I really wanted to work with this particular editor. So I was like, what am I going to do now? The world does not deserve my memoir. What am I going to do? So I took those emotions that Nina Simone had inspired in me and turned them into the 7 necessary sins for women and girls. And I was like, the world needs to go and like fulfill these emotions. So that was the way that I structured the book. And it just ended up being, you know, all the things that I thought made me the feminist that I am, that I wanted to share with the world. And then maybe when the world is ready, it will get my memoir.
Mona, we're ready. Yes, we're ready. Are you guys ready for Mona's memoir? Yes. I feel like my process for the first book is very different from the process for the second book. And talking about editors, I want to shout out to my editor, Alessandra. Please wave. She's a great editor. We had lunch and actually met for the first time like 2 days ago, because for several years we've just been working via Zoom. And I was showing her like my Scrivener, and I'm like, this book, it's got 4 parts, part 1, part 2, part 3, plus 4. And at the end, she was like, okay, I hear you, but what do you think about making part 4, part 2? And I was like, you've got a point. So I think a great editor makes a difference. But with my first book, I had literally written the whole thing before it went to like the publisher, and it didn't really change radically, especially for the UK version. The US version changed because Alessandra was my editor. But with the first book, my process was really, I almost wanted to embody everybody that I interviewed, right? That was really fun for me, like interviewing people and asking them. I knew I wanted to write like a first person point of view book. So I would have to ask like really intimate questions so I could put myself in their shoes. And that was like really, really enjoyable. And with this second book, which I'm working on now, I'm trying to think of what I can say. It's very different. And I have also wanted to deliberately be different because I've wanted to stretch myself, to grow as a writer, and to have a narrative style that I think is more challenging. I hope will be more interesting, and I hope you will all buy when it comes out.
Absolutely. Now I'm like, I want to ask you all the questions about that. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you guys about, I know I want to be mindful of time and make sure everybody here also has the opportunity to ask a question. So just a few more from me. But one of them, we talked a little bit about pleasure and the role of that in your work. But I'd love to hear you both talk about love, right? And how you have come to define it, where you have drawn that definition from, and how it shows up in your work.
You know, it's interesting you asked me this because last year, just before Valentine's Day, a day I hate and detest, because of, you know, all the capitalist stuff, but also because when I was much younger, my boyfriend at the time forgot it was Valentine's Day. And I was so upset. And I was like, what kind of fucking feminist am I that I'm so upset that he forgot about Valentine's Day? So I was like, fuck Valentine's Day forever. So I truly detest Valentine's Day. But the editor-in-chief of Brittle Paper, you know, Aine, yeah? She wrote to me, this is a professor at the University of Wisconsin at Madison who runs this incredible website called Brittle Paper that highlights African fiction, nonfiction, African creative production, literary creative production. She wrote to me, she said, I want to interview you about love. And I was like, no one interviews me about love. I'm more like rage and fascist fuckery. What do you want to talk to me about love for? And so she said, what role does love play in your life? So she really got me thinking. And so I wrote this essay. I wrote 2 essays for Valentine's Day last year. Or was it, maybe it was the year before, I can't remember now, 56 years old. And the first love letter, this is significant, was to Manchester United, the football team, which has been my football team since I was 9. I was like, dear Manchester United, I love you, but my God, the sexual assault, do something about these players. And then the second essay about love was about Kulthum, the Egyptian diva and icon. Kulthum in Egypt is so important and so integral to Egyptian culture. She's often referred to as the 4th pyramid. And so I wrote about the power of love through this anecdote that I had. I moved back to Egypt many times, and the last time I moved back to Egypt was in 2013. And every morning, the construction workers in an apartment next door to me would play the same Kulthum song every morning. It's called Ansek, which means forgetting you, or I want to forget you. It has to do with forgetting. So it's this like song about longing and heartbreak. And in it, she says, if I could love again, I would love you all over. And it really got me thinking about these construction workers. You know, these are working class men in Egypt who are treated like shit. They're not allowed to use the elevator to take big cement bags up for their labor work in the apartment. Nobody looks at them. Nobody thinks about them and love. And these men were listening to this song about love and longing. And it really got me to thinking about who deserves love and who deserves to be loved and who deserves to listen to these, songs of heartbreak and longing. And so I wrote this essay about the importance of Kulthum and how she liberates the lover in us, whether we're a construction worker or somebody like me, a feminist in her 50s who's queer and polyamorous. And in it, I say, Kulthum is like a multiverse unto herself. And I've always feared love because I thought it made me weak. And so I kept away from it for such a long time when I was younger. But I recognized through Kulthum's songs that she makes you powerful and tender. And that's what freedom in love is, to be both powerful and tender. So that's my long-winded way of talking about love and who deserves love. Any of us who can be powerful and tender.
So beautiful. I feel like I'm definitely more comfortable writing about lust than love. I also feel like that's the political choice I made because it felt like women were very much kind of like almost restricted to the area of love. And lust for me has always felt more radical, more interesting, more passionate, I think where I tend to feel the most love is actually with my mom, my friends, and my daughter. I have a 4-year-old, and it is true everything they say. Because kids and dogs, I'm also a dog lover, show you just like the most like love. And they don't really, all they want is to be with you and to spend time with you, That's the purest form of love I have experienced, actually. It does get a bit annoying, especially when your daughter wants to crawl into your bed at night. I like my own space, but yeah, that's my experience of love.
What has that taught you about yourself?
I'm not patient. I like my own bed and I like my own space. I've always known that. Yeah, I think that's what it's taught me, Yeah.
Okay, I promise I will turn it over to folks to ask questions in one moment. But before I do, I'm going to borrow a question that you posed actually in an old interview with the Republic Journal, Nigeria, which was if you weren't writing, what would you be doing for both of you?
Oh my God, I have no idea. It's interesting you asked me this because when we were talking earlier, I asked you, what are you working on? And you asked me this great question, what are you most excited about? And I told Hannah, I'm most excited about starting menopause hormone therapy because, first of all, I like to talk about menopause everywhere I go because there's such stigma and taboo around menopause, and we need to talk about everything to do with our bodies, especially those of us who are cisgender women, and everything to do with our vulvas and vaginas and the ways that our bodies change as we get older are surrounded in so much shame and stigma. So I try to talk about it as much as I can. But I'm very excited about starting menopause hormone therapy because I lost the ability to write for the past 8 months. And it was directly connected to brain fog and anxiety because of my menopause transition. And to be a writer who cannot write, I was like, what the fuck am I? Who am I without my words? And so I'm most excited about getting my words back because I'm writing again. And so when you ask me what would you be if you weren't a writer? I'm like, dude, I just got my words back. Don't do this to me. I just survived an existential crisis.
Keep writing.
I'm a writer, that's it.
I mean, I feel quite lucky because I feel like I almost do everything else I would do if I wasn't a writer. I'm a podcaster. I'm also a communications professional. I think maybe if I wasn't a writer, the other thing I would do is I'll be a TV presenter. Can you guys see it?
Nana, Mona, thank you both so much. Do we have mics? Anybody got a question?
Hi, I'll stand up. My name is Nicole. I had a question about radical feminism now, globally speaking, like we talked about Twitter or X being gone now, and TikTok is on its way out. People are tired of marching. Where do you see, or where do you hope to see the most radical aspects of feminism go in order for us to survive this apocalypse that we're facing?
It's such a great question. I mean, I feel like it's really important for us to find ways to connect in real life, right? And I feel like that's the thing that we need to do more of. We really need to create space and time to meet as feminists, to not just to share our struggles, but actually to really imagine and talk about the worlds we want to create, and to try and model those worlds whenever we meet. Because I feel like that's almost the scary thing that's happening, that we are caught now in a system where we're constantly having to fight back against our rights being ruled. It's preventing us from moving forward. It's preventing us from dreaming and creating and living the lives we want to live. And I think that's what we need to focus on. You know, I feel now more than ever, especially coming from Ghana, where literally a parliament has passed a bill to ban literally advocating for queer rights, providing services to queer people, identifying as queer, housing somebody who is queer, like everything. I feel more passionate about actually creating space where queer people can gather, and we're not going to talk about this. We're just going to live our best lives. That's it.
I'm going to shamelessly self-promote here because I think it directly answers your question. My newsletter, Feminist Giant, 3 times a week publishes something called Global Roundup. And, okay. Oh, Nicole, oh my God, it's you. Excuse me. Do you remember what I said about my vagina and eyes? My vagina works better than my eyes. It's you, of course it's you. Then you know. Then I'm going to shamelessly promote to the other people. It's a friend of mine back there. Hi, Nicole. When you get to the stage where you can't even recognize your own friends, you're like, fuck, I need to see the eye doctor. Okay, the rest of you. I'm going to shamelessly promote. So Global Roundup is basically the paid contributors to my newsletter. My newsletter is free, but if you have funds, I appreciate paid subscriptions because I pay these 2 contributors called Samiha and Inara. And what they do is they collect stories of feminist resistance from around the world, because I think people forget that we are resisting every day. And I said to them when they first started working with me, I don't want stories of rape and murder where we just constantly hear about the terrible things that are happening to women. And if you do include stories about rape and murder, make sure that in those stories include the protests and like the ferocious resistance from feminists in those communities so that people understand that every day we fight back. And I said to them, decenter the so-called West, decenter so-called whiteness, and be as inclusive as possible. So many of the stories come from countries around the world. Many of them are about indigenous people. Many of them are about queer people. Many of them are about trans and non-binary people. And many of them focus on non-normative narratives. And it's so important because this is not original reporting that they're doing. What they're doing is they're curating already reported stories. But because you don't see those stories on the front page, they often fall out of sight. And people often write to me and say, oh my God, I had no idea that there was such ferocious feminist resistance around the world. And that's because it's usually on page 20. But when you see it in one place, you're like, oh my God, look at these Afghan women. Oh my God, look at these indigenous women in Cameroon. Oh my God, look at this. So subscribe to Feminist Giant. And if you can, please pay. Thank you very much.
And I just want to add to that, because I think it is really important that we develop our own media platforms. We cannot rely on these social media networks. We have to create our own platforms. That's one of the things I appreciate about Ventures, because I realized that over time, we had literally become a publishing platform, you know, for African women to share their stories around sex and sexualities. And I think it's really important for us to do. I'm really appreciating feminist newsletters nowadays, especially newsletters like yours, the Feminist Giant. And so, yeah, if folks have your platforms here, please, let's just nurture them and support each other.
Hi, this is such a treat. Mona, I do subscribe and pay for your newsletter. And I have a particular love of your hair. I've been following you for many years. So I actually have a question for each of you. Mona, you took up weightlifting as I think part of your menopause journey. So I'd just love for you to share maybe sort of what that is about and what that means for you. And Nana, what has been I think we know there's sort of, I've also been following, early subscribers to Adventures in the Bedrooms of African Women. Excited to see the book, etc. And what I'm curious kind of what the reception has been on the continent, sort of not only Ghana, like what is the spread across the continent and what your sense is of kind of the intergenerational, you have the intergenerational stories, and as Africans we have, in many sort of societies, particularly as women are getting ready to marry, there's a way in which there's certain kind of education around sexuality for better or worse. It's sort of complex, but I'm just curious kind of what the reception, particularly to the book, who is your kind of your readership on the continent?
Okay, I love the question. Is there anyone here from Kenya? Yes. I mean, I feel like Kenya is probably the place where my book is the most popular. To the point where it's available on the street for $1. And people bring me fake copies of my books to sign, and then I'm like, but yeah, that's something I really appreciate that my UK publisher took really seriously. My one anxiety about, the one anxiety I had about being published in the West was, will my book be available to Africans on the continent, And so that was like the one meeting I insisted on having with the sales department of my UK publisher, and they've done an amazing job. It is widely available, especially in Kenya. And it's been interesting hearing people's feedback about the book. I've had people come and buy just a whole bunch and bring it to my house to sign because it's for, their group of sister friends, and they're maybe like women in their 50s, and they'll invite me to discuss it with them. And some of them will say, this book is making me question my sexuality, which makes me happy. I've had people tell me about colleagues getting divorced because they read my book. I'm here for the chaos. I also have men buying lots of copies, like, oh, we're buying it for the women in our lives. That thing I always find interesting is men DM me how much they like the book, and women post it on their Instagram. And I think one of the things that makes me really happy is usually a lot of young queer people say to me, I've never felt so seen in my life. And that just warms my heart. Yeah. So I would say the reception has been overwhelmingly positive. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your kind words, and our admiration is mutual, because I love your presentation as well, so thank you. I did start weightlifting, strength training, primarily because I was fully into my menopause transition. So I started it actually coincidentally, maybe not coincidentally, it was about maybe 3 weeks before I thought, that's it, because I don't know if everybody here knows, but the word menopause actually refers to one day in the life. And it is that one day that marks 12 months exactly since your last period. We often just say menopause about the whole thing, but it's that one day. And before that, you're perimenopausal, and after that, you're postmenopausal. So about 3 weeks before that one day for me, I started strength training. And I had read that it's one of the best things that you can do because of the amount of muscle mass that we lose as we get older. But that's not as romantic as, and this is from the person who doesn't do love, it's not as romantic as what I now realize I was doing, or what I was doing, and the reason that I started strength training. And I think the reason that I began to lift really heavy weights, and I am now deadlifting, so I weigh 154 pounds, and I can deadlift 195 pounds. So I can deadlift more than my body weight. The squats I'm still working on them. But I realized that I started lifting these really heavy weights because I wanted an external reminder of how strong I am as I was struggling with my menopause transition. And I think it was when I could lift these really, really heavy weights that I allowed myself to start menopause hormone therapy. Because I thought for the longest time I was just going to plow through it because I'm a strong woman and I don't need any help and I'm going to do this. Tell that to your brain when it's missing estrogen. Tell that to so many other parts of your body when hormones suddenly decrease and it fucks you up. You can be the strongest person on this earth and it fucks you up. And so I needed this reminder that I'm a really strong woman. And it was a way of questioning and complicating what is a strong woman? Because so often a strong woman under patriarchy is a woman who is resilient in suffering. And so it made me ask, what is the virtue in suffering? Why am I suffering? What am I getting from this fucking suffering? What am I proving to anyone? What do I need? Why do I need to prove to anyone that I can suffer and be strong? Do you know what I mean? So I enacted that by lifting these really heavy weights. I'm like, see there, I'm strong. I'm going to go take my hormones now. So I think it was part of that. And it was a part of calling a truce with my body at a time when I was feeling especially estranged from my body. I was like, what, all these changes, what is happening? So I think this is why, and I highly recommend strength training to everyone, not just because it's good for muscle mass, but it does something for you where this whole thing, it's a whole other thing about trauma and other stuff. And can I say something really quick, another anecdote? It made me realize that being in the body and embodying something was a journey that I began in Egypt in 2013 when I joined the Egyptian Nudist Society. See, this is why the world needs my memoir. Because the Egyptian Nudist Society was an experience unlike any that I'd had before. I'm not a nudist, but politically, I will do anything that will promote the cause. So what I eat, how I fuck, how I dress, how I do my hair, and nudism, And I'd never done that before, being a nudist, I'd never done that before, but sitting in a living room in Egypt under a fascist regime and taking our clothes off, knowing that the apartment could be raided at any time and we could all disappear. And then at the end of like 2 hours of sitting among all these people naked, which I'd never done before, everyone gets up to leave, right? And one of the women who had been there naked for the entire 2 hours went inside to put her clothes back on and came out in hijab. And I was like, fuck me, oh my God. So it was just all these stories of our bodies and what we do with them and embodying, to be embodied. This is what strength training is doing for me.
I just wanted to say to you, Mona, thank you for sharing so publicly about your menopause transition, because we don't hear enough of these stories. I interviewed Mona for the last season of the Adventures from the Bedrooms of African Women podcast, and I learned so much. I've also written a contribution to the anthology. And what that enabled me to do was to interview my own mum about her menopause journey. So I feel better prepared, So I just want to say thank you.
Hannah wrote a beautiful essay for the anthology. Before we end, oh, good, we have more questions. I thought you were going to say we're going to wrap up.
All right. So hi, my name is Vivian. I organize with Feminist in Kenya. As feminists who've been in the space for quite some time, what advice would you give, younger feminists who are just beginning to organize, especially just recognizing that we are organizing in a very neoliberal context that makes even feminist activists sometimes replicate harm within movements. So I don't know what strategies you've had to implement to navigate the harm even within the space, but also what strategies for joy do you have? Thank you.
It's a good question. And it's also a hard question, because I have done things like, created feminist circles where we had no ground rules, nothing. You assume we are all feminists and everything is fine. And it's fine for the first year until the drama happens. I feel like what I would now do is just explain to people that it's okay when we have disagreements. It's actually okay to disagree. the fact that we're feminists, the fact that we're in a movement doesn't mean we are all going to have the same opinion all of the time. What we have to learn to do is talk about the differences and learn to talk to each other respectfully. So I would just start off, as boring as it sounds, with some basic agreements amongst members of the group in terms of how you would deal with difficulties when they arise, because they will arise. You know, for me as well, any feminist circle should also be a place of joy, you know? So I would center it around food and drinks and conversations and fun topics. You know, in my feminist circle, we used to have a monthly theme. We spoke about sex 3 times, you know, but then we also did other things that we considered more serious, like supporting as a space for survivors of violence. I think it's important to mix it up, right? But then also just have fun with your feminist community as well. Yeah, so just do the basic agreements, anticipate hard times will come, and have a plan for how you deal with that.
There was a question next to you.
Nadia, you had a question.
Okay, I was like, are we done? I want to hear more. I want to ask you both about friendships. Oh, sorry, my name is Nadia. You both are very engaging, right? If someone writes to you, you answer, you know, and it's people you don't know, but you always answer and you share so much of yourself. So I'm very curious in your journey. You know, talk to us a bit about your friendships, new friendships, old friendships, and how that process has either brought you community or taken it away, and how you've navigated that. So many things, but yes, thank you.
Thank you for asking that. That's a good question. I'm rarely asked that question at events, so thank you, Nadia. I think friendships are really important, especially when you're so public, because we were talking earlier about getting hate online and the ways to survive hate online, protect yourself from hate online. And I'm often asked the question by younger women, how do you deal with hate online? And through my own experience, I tell them the best thing to do is to get offline and be with people who know you. Because I think one of the most pernicious things that hate online does is that it makes you question who you are. Because it's so easy for people to write to you and, you know, criticize what you do. And you hear more from people who attack you than people who support you, and it can make you question who you are. But those friends that you're talking about are the ones who know who you are. So it really helps to be in like face-to-face contact with someone who knows who you are, so that you can basically build up your muscles, you know, strengthening muscles of your heart, you know, to be with friends. But I think it also, because, I don't know about you, Nana, but because I'm so public and because I do speak quite forcefully, I recognize, quite polarizing. And I have lost friends along the way because of my opinions. I will never forget that I was in Damascus many years ago and speaking to an activist there. He was a journalist, actually. He had been imprisoned by the Assad regime for 16 years. I don't know how anyone can walk around and just have a regular life after being in prison for 16 years for their political convictions. He was such a lovely, warm man. And he was telling me, he was joking, because we're both opinion writers. And he was telling me, Mona, you know what the hardest thing about being an opinion writer is? And I was like, what? He goes, I've lost so many friends. I don't think I have anyone left. Because you tell the world how you feel about something, and someone somewhere is going to be offended. So I have lost friends because of things that I have written. I've also lost friends just because we've changed, or just people are just mysterious and just drop out of your life. So this is also a reminder that, you know, we have words for romantic breakups, and we have rituals for romantic breakups, and we don't have rituals for the breakups of friends. And there's this one particular friend that is constantly, she's not constantly on my mind because I try to forget. It's kind of like the ex. I'm never following you on social media again. But every now and then I'm like, why the fuck did she stop being my friend? I just don't understand, you know? So friendship is such a complex, rich, powerful, painful, loving thing. So thank you for asking that question.
It's a great question, Nadia, because my friendships are so important to me. Lauren, who is sitting right here, we've been friends since we were 16, you know, and like we haven't seen each other for years, but when I'm in New York, she'll always make the effort to come and see me. And I have those kind of friends. And then I'm also one of those people I still love to have a best friend. I always need a bestie, you know? My bestie at the moment is a guy, and some of my friends have problems with that. Yeah, they're like, he gets away with things because he's friends with you. And I'm like, what? And it's so funny because in the past 3 weeks, you know, when people say it's Mercury in retrograde, there's been so much drama in my friend circles. And I am just like, but I thought we were good. And people are now telling me about the things I did to piss them off 4 years ago. I'm like, what? And it's like, seriously, I've had 2 friends have drama with me, and it's all from years ago. And like, they're suddenly telling me, and I'm like, okay, I'm glad you now feel like you're able to tell me, but what am I supposed to do with this? But I've also had to learn that, yes, there's a saying like, you know, for a season, a reason, or a lifetime. You know, I've tried to accept that with my friendships because I feel like I invest so much in my friendships. I'm that person who's always like, when can we next hang out? I'll be in your city. Let's, you know, and I've had to just accept that some friendships can be really intense and really be good for a couple of months or a couple of years. And then for whatever reason, things change. You may upset people. They don't know how to communicate to you. Yeah, so there's some friends I feel like we'll be friends forever. There's some friends I'm like, it was good. It's upsetting that we're no longer friends. I don't know why, but I'm just going to accept it and say you were in my life for a reason. Yeah. Nadia is also one of my friends.
We have time for one more.
Yeah, okay. Good evening. I'm Esther from Kenya. I had raised up my hand quickly because I wanted, when you're respond to the question around accountability within friends. You know, how has your experience been being held accountable for something that you've ever done, or someone feel really conflicted about that they're telling you? How did you deal with that? But also the accountability also within the feminist movements. How have you, seen it play out? Because, I organized in Kenya with also an organization called Zamara Foundation. And we've seen that where, when accountability comes into play within the movement, then the movement also falls out at that time. Because then at times, as much as we need to be held to account, also think about the biases that comes with it. Think about how also funding plays out within the movement. So maybe share your experience in terms of accountability in the whole spectrum, both personally with friends, but also within the movement. How can we better be accountable to each other in a way that is more in solidarity, in a way that is showing each other grace, but still holding someone accountable for their actions that are not either great or they disrupted the movement. Thank you.
I feel like I have so many thoughts. So accountability in friendships. I think one of the things that, I was talking about the drama in my friend circles, right? The thing that I'm realizing, I think I'm having to accept is that, for some people who are close to my life that I've kind of felt we are equal because we've known each other for a long time, they're aware of this huge power differential between us that I hadn't really seen because I just felt like we were equal. So this is something I'm struggling. But then what it basically means is if I am somehow perceived as the more powerful friend, then I have more of a responsibility to kind of check in with the other person to make sure it's okay if I suggest we go to this restaurant, or to check that they're not coming along with me because they feel like they have to. I feel like that's something I'm still navigating. So there's something to do with power in there. And then when it comes to accountability within movements and within feminist circles, I feel like absolutely as a feminist, we should be held accountable to our values and to our principles, but we need to do this in a loving way. And I guess this is where the love comes in, right? Usually it means offline, in person. If you know me and you have my number or my email, or you can DM me, why don't you just give me feedback directly? What's the point in the feedback, right? Are you giving me feedback because you want me to do better? Then you have to think of how you give the feedback such that I am motivated to do better. And I think that's something we don't think about enough, right? Where are the spaces where we can call each other in? We don't need to call each other out. Let's call each other in. Let's speak. And I feel like this is where usually things fall apart, because people feel holding you accountable is naming and shaming you in a public platform. I think it's completely different if you don't have access to the person. But if you have access to the person, I beg, just reach out to them and speak to them.
So before we end with your consent and love, I have a tradition when I have events, and it is to ask those of you who can stand, and at the count of 3. Oh, yeah, okay, yes, go ahead. You do it, Nana.
Okay. So there's so many things. There was a sign outside reminding us that today is the anniversary of Marielle Franco's death. She was an Afro-Brazilian feminist. Maybe we can just take 30 minutes to think of not just her, but all the feminist activists and defenders around the world who have lost their lives trying to create a better world. Yeah, so just maybe 30 seconds of silence. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Nana. Okay, this is not silent at all, because I ask those of you who can stand to please stand, and at the count of 3, we are going to yell really loudly, "Fuck the patriarchy." Okay, some people like to film this, so if you would like to film this and share it with the world, I encourage you. Okay, I'm going to keep my microphone down, otherwise I will deafen you. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Fuck the patriarchy! Okay, that was good, but I know you can do better. We're going to do a couple more because, you know, we got to warm you up, okay? Second time around, let's see how you do it, all right? Fuck the patriarchy! Great. Okay, thank you for that. I love it. Okay, this final one now. This final one now, I want it to be so loud that it reaches the bowels of Donald Trump. Fascist fucks everywhere. Fucking Netanyahu. The LGBTQ bill in the Ghanaian parliament. Really, really loud. All across Central Park. Okay, are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Thank you so much. Thank you, Hannah.
Home isn't just where we're from. It's the sounds that move us, the stories that shape us, and the flavors that heal us. It's the communities that connect us, the ones that hold us down, the ones that raise us up. Home is a feeling we all know. So if you're looking for it, you can always find it here. The Africa Center. Home is here.